Anyway, I think that means we finally can get round to the main topic of tonight, which is, of course, the anti-Semitism in the anti-trans movement. Um, I feel sorry for our guest here, who's just currently sitting out for now.
It's
So
completely fine. I'm just listening in.
I'm sorry, man. Yeah, it's just we will get to you. Don't worry. Um, so the first story that sort of brought all this together, this popped up on Twitter, was the Daily Fail running a story about the facts that the Bank of England has 3 times more transgender staff than the average population in the UK. Um, which just as a story seems so peculiar. Like, why does this deserve, a article of its own? Uh, that is until you realise that the Daily Fail, which is the Daily Mail, is a fascist rag. How do we know it's a fascist rag? Well, cis man explainer Graham Linehan back in 2016 acknowledged the fact that it is a fascist rag. Of course, Graham would then go on to write for the Daily Fail in 2019 and thank them for all their lovely services and everything in helping the transphobic mindset. But that's just a little consistency problem. So yes, the Daily Fail is far right, it's fascist, it pushes anti-immigrant, and it pushes anti-Semitic, anti-trans, anti-gay. It all of the boxes it ticks. It is just a bigoted fascist rag. So, when we take that into consideration, the focus of trans people being more prevalent in banking starts to take on a bit more of a sinister dog whistle undertone. For those who are lucky enough not to know that much about white supremacy, one of the dog whistles they like to use when it relates back to the whole anti-Semitism and the whole, they're taking all our money, is that the banker, which is just another synonym for the globalist or Illuminati, has very anti-Semitic undertones. I don't know how prevalent this is in the States as much. I do see it in a lot of far-right
It
content.
is.
Okay.
My dad works for a bank. He works for the National Bank, the Federal Reserve. And for a long, long, long time, I was scared to tell my non-Jewish friends about that because they'd hear Jewish person with dad who works at bank, therefore I help control the world's economy, and I'm like this secretly super rich person, but despite being on food stamps.
I mean, it is a non-story here. There is another section that they kind of inserted into the side of the story, which I think Levi might have some comments on in a second. But all it is a internal survey found that 158 of the central bank's 4,575 employees stated that their gender identity was different to the sex they were assigned at birth. So 3% of the institution's workforce. Meanwhile, Stonewall states that the best estimate for the number of transgender people across Britain is 1%, or about 600,000 people, including those who identify as non-binary. There's several things to note here. One is economic security. Not always, but people who are working in banking are more likely to come from what I'm trying to think here, educated backgrounds, because you need certain degrees to do certain positions. So you're more likely to have financial security that others are going to lack. So if you're a trans person in that position, you're probably more likely to be open about the fact that you are trans than, say, in the general population. The 1% of the general population is trans is the current estimate. if you look at like the estimates for bisexuality in the general population, that went from being, 1 in 100 to 1 in 10 to 50% of our youth. We wildly underestimate the prevalence of queer identities because they have been suppressed for so long. So this sort of difference doesn't actually necessarily mean that there is a higher prevalence of trans people in the Bank of England, but it sounds scary, especially with the narrative being that the trans, the trans conspiracy has control over the NHS. That's the particular one that we see here in the UK. Somehow, in spite of like 2 to 3 year waiting list for the NHS, we apparently have all the power, all the control, etc. And so for a fascist rag like the Daily Mail to link that demographic to an anti-Semitic dog whistle, it kind of doubles up. Now you can hate them for both reasons. However, it's not just the abstract. We can talk about the dog whistle here, but there have also been recent events which have had literal Nazis come out and make the solid connection for themselves. We discussed Elliot, is it Elliot Page? It is Elliot Page. Whenever I think Elliot, like my mind goes to Elliot Rodger. Elliot Page coming out as trans. So I'm sure most of you remember that story, or you've heard about it on Twitter. Elliot Page came out as trans rather publicly, expressing that they now went by they, them, and he, him pronouns. And there's been quite significant shift in how quickly a lot of their information has been updated versus, say, the Wachowski sisters, who came out in the mid-noughties. So like there has been like a sign of a shift that, hey, like all this stuff can be updated without years and years of debate, etc. about things. Netflix has changed certain credits. I've heard that they haven't changed others, but they're still on it. Pages like Wikipedia have been updated, IMB and all this. So it's been nice to see there is progress in that regard. But at the same time, there was, of course, a big backlash coming from the gender critical crowd, who started spinning this narrative of lost lesbian. They were not the only ones to start spinning a narrative. Following Elliot Page coming out, the Daily Stormer, which, for those who don't know, the Daily Stormer is a Nazi. It's a Nazi. I hesitate to call it a paper. It's not a paper. It's a
publication in the loosest possible sense. It's a publication in the loosest sense,
yeah. It's a Nazi site. Came out and they started making a string of assertions. One of which was the quote, F2M transgenderism is a plot to exterminate the white race by neutralizing our breeding vessels, end quote. Which, I don't know if either of you have anything to say on, because this is less my field right here.
I do have thoughts, but before I get to those, Hananya, would you like to tell the lovely people watching about your reaction when I told you about this casually when we were trying to figure out what order to do these stories in?
I started laughing at the idea of Jews are trying to steal our wombs.
It was so bad. Like I'm just so used to this stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, Nazis are accusing Jews of trying to steal the wombs from white people, whatever. I tried to keep going with what I was saying several times, and I realized, okay, no, this is a thing. I'm gonna have to stop for a solid 5 minutes just so that they can like breathe. Just breathe and compose themselves.
By the way, I should note that quote there didn't mention the Jews. A later quote did, which stated that, quote, it couldn't survive if 95% of our women were wiped out, so it should be of a very major concern that the Jewish media and education system are attempting to make as many young girls as possible into transgenders. Like, that's not dog whistle there. That's neon.
It's just regular
signs
whistle.
flashing. That's
That's
an
just
air raid
screaming
siren.
into the void.
Yes, I just
Blade,
thought
would
I'd
you like
add
to tell
that.
us about Blade, would you like to tell us about the totally real time your rabbi told you to be trans?
What's hilarious about that is, I went to an Orthodox Jewish school, so like very, very Jewish, very, very into the whole Judaism's great thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they were right wing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's also just the fact that, like, I want to have kids.
And that's another thing. Elliot, I believe their partner is a cis woman. I cannot remember. I believe they are currently dating a cis woman. So it's like, what's changed?
Well, that's the thing, is the article has this weird conflation of lesbians and trans men.
Yes,
They think
lesbians
that
are
being a
gateway
trans
drug.
man, they seem to think trans men are like super lesbians, like when you really want to show your commitment to lesbianism, you be a trans man, which I find hilarious. 'Cause
Yeah, Levi,
You can't-
didn't you start transitioning and consider yourself gay?
yes.
Lesbians.
There are lesbian
Lesbianism
trans
is a hell of a
men.
drug.
There are lesbian trans men, but they're in the minority.
Mhm.
But yeah, so there's a few reasons why this take is very silly. They're very obvious, and we all know them. But I will point them out for your entertainment. Is
That's why we're here.
trans men of color exists. That's the first one. Jews are not overwhelmingly trans, like friendly. Like there are trans positive Jews.
Mhm.
Not all of them. The Jews don't control the media. There's also this one bit that made me really, really annoyed, just because of what I've been through in my transition. They said that transitioning makes you infertile. And I do want to go through this just for like an educational thing. So if you are transitioning, if you're trans femme, if you're going on estrogen and you have like testicles, chances are reasonable. Like, it's not definite, but there's a big chance you might become infertile. And the explanation I've heard for this is because you have to actually like produce sperm every single day. But if you're trans mass, if you have ovaries, all of the eggs are inside your body at the moment your body already have them. So the chances of becoming infertile from testosterone are actually not that high. Testosterone does reduce your fertility, but it is not reliable for birth control. Like, my endocrinologist is really aggressive about, you need to be on a hormonal birth control and you need to use a condom. Do not use testosterone as birth control. It doesn't work. And the thing about that reduced fertility as well is if you go off testosterone, it will usually come back. So testosterone really doesn't reduce your fertility at all. It doesn't make you infertile. It's not taking, you still have your womb, you still have your ovaries, nothing is being taken away. You just get a beard and a deep voice and some extra hair, and that's basically it. It's not a plot to take away white women's boobs. That's not how testosterone works.
Minor correction, Elliot is married, not dating. Sorry about that.
Okay.
But yes.
I was just worried for a second, thinking that it was something I said.
No, it was something I said. But yeah. So like this whole thing feeds into the whole idea of the great replacement. This idea that for some reason Jewish people just want to like end white people for some reason.
That was the main theme when I brought this up to my Jewish friends. I was like, hey, so apparently we want to turn everyone trans in order to get rid of white people? And they're like, but why though? But why would we take over? Why?
It's just, that's the
Because
thing. A conspiracy
According to
doesn't
them,
need to
we
make
already
sense.
have the world. We already took over the world. But also, we want to take over the world more? Question
My
mark?
head, my head canon for this is like maybe the devil is offering you a bagel if you do it.
But that's another thing. Like, we are, the white race is the superior race, but it's being destroyed by everything. Like, blue hair destroys white supremacy. Yeah. That's the thing. Conspiracies don't need to be consistent.
I'm sorry, I think
yeah,
there's a whirring sound on my end. Usually it's quiet here, but not this
I
time.
don't hear a whirring sound. Is it my
I
audio?
don't either. You're good.
Okay.
Okay, it's just going to annoy me then.
I have dogs outside. No trains yet. No train saying hi. I am disappointed.
God dang it.
After all of this, train says hi.
The trains,
No train.
the trains are anti-Semitic.
But yes. Anyway, so, disturbingly, this really mirrors up with a lot of rhetoric coming from the gender critical crowd, which is again the stolen lesbians. Our lesbians are being taken from us by the gender ideology or whatever name they are deciding to take today. And the thing is, this is not new. This whole link between gender critical and anti-Semitism is not new. Notably, when talking about the medical conspiracy, the whole idea that the NHS is somehow dominated by trans people, in spite of the fact that the wait list has grown from 6 months to a year to 2 years and now 3 years. Despite all of this, they keep forwarding the narrative that certain business minds are donating or, funding, the trans agenda. That's the usual catch-all expression, the trans agenda, which is where we get the show name from. And one of the people that they love to go on about in this regard is, of course, George Soros. George Soros is a punching bag for these far-right conspiracy theories. In spite of the fact that what they do is public, so it kind of sucks as a conspiracy, the fact that they have in the past donated some money to trans causes, which, remind you, is not some philanthropic thing. I'm not here to, defend multimillionaires or billionaires. It's done for tax reasons. But the fact that it is done for this is evidence that there is a conspiracy to trans our youth, and that's what the Daily Stormer here is making reference to. They're trying to eliminate our breeding stock. Again, it's always
That's just so sexist.
Yeah, there's always a focus on, typically, not always, there is variance in this, typically, trans women are a threat, trans men and female-assigned non-binary folk, they're lost lesbians,
Trans women are a threat, trans men are property.
Yeah. Which says a lot more about the person behind it. And of course, one of the big proponents of this this conspiracy theory is Magdalene Burns, who, for those who don't know, is the person pictured in the thumbnail for this episode. I realize that some of you recognized her. For those who don't recognize her, she was a particularly vicious transphobe here on YouTube. She kept switching between far right and feminist lingo whenever she needed it, sort of thing. Excuse me. Famously, she compared being a trans woman to putting on blackface, urging for violence against trans women for that reason, which yikes, as a white woman colonizing a narrative, yikes. But like one thing that's always underreported, particularly after J.K. Rowling in her big transphobic shitface of an essay referenced her as an inspiration, a martyr to the gender critical crowd. One thing that has typically been forgotten and left at the wayside, not by everyone, but it's not nearly brought up as much as the blackface thing, is the fact that she was one of the people pushing the George Soros conspiracy, posting multiple articles about George Soros being the money behind the transgender movement, continually going on about like this dark secret plan to assign female people. So this is not something new, and like I don't want to give the impression by talking about this Daily Fail article now and the Daily Stormer that this is something new. So yes, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to what I've said so far. I'm sorry, I'm taking up most of the airtime.
Yeah, well, when don't you?
Hananya, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, not really. I'm just
sorry.
kind of... No, you're fine.
I feel like we invited you on, and like, yeah.
I'm jumping in when I have something to say.
I'm just thinking more about the whole stealing our wombs thing. It's actually making me really upset because so I don't know if I've talked about this on the stream before. I know I have mentioned, like, alluded to it on Twitter. I recently realized I actually grew up with this idea of being property, of like my womb being a resource for someone else to control. And just, it was a lot easier to deal with when I thought it was just one person who has some very obvious issues, being particularly misogynistic. But now seeing it being so prevalent, not just among Nazis, but among supposed feminists as well, it's really not nice to go through that.
Yeah, and this whole thing it just like reveals that like this whole feminism, this radical feminism, trans-inclusionary radical feminism is not feminist in the slightest. Like the arguments made about fertility and everything like this, it's the same arguments like about having a hysterectomy and birth control. They talk about how, oh, well, you're destroying like perfectly good ovaries by transitioning, regardless of what type of transitioning you're doing, whether it's social transitioning, because apparently socially transitioning somehow has a medical impact.
On that. I plan on having kids. I plan on having multiple kids, actually, at least 2. And, like, I also am, like, very, very, very afraid of TERF circles and mentioning that I'm trans. I don't like being in TERF circles, but like if I'm ever around them, I cannot say I'm trans because then they'll start losing their shit at me that I'm betraying my gender and like hurting my fellow women, which by the way, ew, but also just I'm like exactly what you want and yet you still say I'm a traitor.
Yeah. I mean,
what the hell?
But also on the other side of the scale, it's like people who do sexually transition because they've got like severe gender dysphoria and it's a way for them to alleviate it. Like the argument, the undertone here is that they should sacrifice their life to preserve an organ.
Yeah.
And you'd never say that to a cis woman. You would never say that.
I mean, you'd be surprised, but a feminist, I don't think, or even a woman pretending to be a feminist, I don't think would say to a cis woman.
And do you know what it always reminds me of? It always reminds me of conservative Christians in America who say no abortions not even in cases where the fetus is non-viable and it will kill the host. You know, it just reminds me of that. It is so cold and callous. It treats the person as disposable, but the organ as sacred. And that
it's
is
this
just...
idea that your organs matter more than you.
I would also just like to say thank you, Ethel, for saying Christians, because so many people conflate that with like all Abrahamic religions, and Judaism is very, very not for that. We literally view the fetus as not alive, like able to be aborted for whatever reason until it comes out. So no matter what, host's life comes first. If like if it's gonna make them unhappy for whatever reason,
they
get an
retain their
abortion.
bodily autonomy.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's a big thing, and I'm not even saying like that's like a radical idea in Judaism. I went to a friend who's like the most religious guy out there, and I was like, hey, so say I got raped, what would happen? And he was like, oh, get an abortion. No duh.
Sorry, I just spilled some tea. I was listening.
You spilled some tea.
Yes, not that kind of tea.
I'm just trying to figure out why this is making me feel so gross, because I'm actually a little dissociated. It's not your fault. It's their fault for being disgusting. But like, it's actually to the point where I'm a little dissociated. I'm just trying to figure out what it is about it that's pissing me off. And I think it's this expectation that you, just because of your perceived gender, you have to be self-sacrificing. Self-sacrifice is not always a bad thing. Sometimes if you're choosing to do it for whatever reason, you know, it can be something to be very proud of, something that's very meaningful. But being forced to sacrifice yourself for something is very unpleasant. It's not a good way to live.
That's the thing. A self-sacrifice has to be a self-sacrifice.
Yeah.
It absolutely is horrific, and nothing gets done about it, which is interesting. You know, considering the current stuff that's going on in the UK, specifically around the Labour Party, which I don't know if either of you know much about. Jeremy Corbyn, under his leadership, various accusations of Antisemitism came out. They did an investigation. They implemented a new policy to fight it. It was decreasing under that policy. Keir Starmer came to power, ejected Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn's come back. But then also Keir Starmer just recently ejected a left-leaning, like a Jew from the party, for various things. You know, and it's just interesting because Keir is doing absolutely nothing about the transphobia problem, and as this is hopefully showing you, the transphobia problem and the which is like based on this whole narrative of they're transing our children, we need to protect the children, it's the secret Illuminati behind the curtain, we need to fight that. That is based in anti-Semitic rhetoric. But it doesn't help Keir Starmer's neoliberalism, so that gets ignored. So, you know, there's that. One thing I did just want to add, we'll come back to do finishing notes if you have any. There's just one element I did want to add, and that's because we're talking about anti-Semitism. There is another part of the bigotry to the gender-critical crowd, and that is the Islamophobia, which I do want to mention. I don't want to pretend like it doesn't exist. Kelly J. Keane Minshaw, more commonly known as Posey Parker, has some rather interesting thoughts. For those who don't know who Posey Parker is, Keane Minshaw is the bigot responsible for the the white text on a black background, which is the dictionary definition of woman, which says adult human female. Now, first of all, that is a she campaign. That does not exclude trans women. But the thing is, there's the social context behind it, which is like that's what it's become associated with. It's become associated with attempts to exclude trans people. So even though it fails, it's still viewed as transphobic. She is constantly trying to sell her merchandise with this definition on. And like, you know, so she's quite big here in the UK Turk crowd. She's also quite big overseas in America. So, you know, that's her. She is close friends with Stephen Christopher Yakesley Lennon, who is someone else I've covered on the channel. They are known as Tommy Robinson, who is a Nazi. There's no other way to say it. And she regularly promotes his work. Yakesley Lennon is a person who jeopardized there was a court process going over certain grooming rings, child grooming rings. Yakesley Lennon jeopardized the entire trial, so people could go for a mistrial, just so he could get himself arrested and line his own pockets, whilst propagating an Islamophobic narrative. So again, all this bigotry is connected in like a dozen different ways. The bigotry got so bad that Jean Hatchett, isn't it? I believe it was Jean Hatchett. Yes, it was Jean Hatchett, another big transphobe, left, both over the working with the far right, Tommy Robinson, the Proud Boys, but also the working with the Heritage Foundation, which is another thing Posey likes to do. So, yeah, the idea that there is anything left or feminist about these people and these groups, absolute garbage. So I guess I just want to open up if anyone has any questions for our guest today, any comments they want to point out, etc. Do ask. Hananya and Levi, is there anything you'd like to add on the story? We've just passed the hour mark, or have we covered most of the bases?
I can't think of anything.
I'm just waiting to see if anyone says anything in the chat. Look,
just to double check, you got it set to live chat, not top chat, right?
I have it set to live chat on.
That person's getting hidden.
I had it set on.
What about?
I had it set on live chat at one, but not on the other.
What about Christophobia? You can't. Christians are the majority. Just...
Christianphobia isn't a thing. It just isn't
yeah,
a thing.
because Christians are just basically everyone.
Mm-hmm.
The moment someone tells me that Christmas is just a secular holiday, it means that Christianphobia is not a thing. I have legitimately been asked why I don't have a Christmas tree in my house by people who are aware I'm Jewish. So, yeah.
I'm kind of lucky. I grew up spending time in Norway, so it's always been good Yule, not Christmas. So I'm kind of lucky in that regard. Well, yeah, it can be astonishing.
I got very confused by that name because it's spelled J-U-L. Thought you meant July.
One thing I'm salty about that I just need to state. There's a shopping center right across the street from my house, and when you drive in, there's a giant, like 50-foot tall Christmas tree. It is very, very, very tall. Mm-hmm. And you're like, oh, well, it's probably they probably like care a bit about Jewish people. And yeah, in the very back of the shopping mall, they have a tiny little cardboard display of the dreidels, not even the most important part of Hanukkah, which is the Chanukiah, but the dreidels, which is literally a toy.
But that doesn't fit the persecution complex that Christians have. Because their entire narrative about getting into heaven and everything is based around the idea that they will be persecuted. So the fact that that hasn't happened, the fact that they were at the forefront of colonialism with missionaries and everything like that, they have to do some revision. So yeah. Like, our house, the winter holidays, is just a mix of everything. Because of course we've got Diwali as well, which is the light festival, and everything else just happening here. So yeah, our house is just a mess. I was hanging up sparkly beads last night. It's just like, this is a magpie nest. There is just glitter, no rhyme or reason. It's just, yeah.
Is that really a magpie nest? Isn't that just mandatory gay?
Wow. Okay.
Am I wrong?
I try to make the bird puns. You just go straight for the...
Blame Blade.
Yes.
They're the ones always making those jokes.
Are you saying you don't eat the pudding? How could you not eat the pudding? If we're talking about Christmas pudding and raisins, I cannot stand raisins. No.
I'm sorry. I sound so ignorant here. What the heck is Christmas pudding?
Terrible. You're not missing out.
In general, is pretty terrible.
I get donuts. I get donuts. That's my winter treat. It's awesome.
Someone got the heaviest bran bread, like really awful, cheap, nasty, heavy stuff that tastes like a brick, stuffed a load of raisins and like moldy fruit in it, drenched it in alcohol. This is just horrible.
Ew.
I can't stand fruitcake either. I can't stand any of these.
No. Just do sufganiyot. Which, by the way, just means donut. Just do donut.
That's the thing. I can get fried stuff here in India all the time.
There
is a reason India has a diabetes epidemic. It's fried stuff from breakfast to dinner and dessert even. But yeah.